The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
All right. Hi, everybody. So you're all coming in muted. So I thought about this. Does anybody out there know how to raise their hand in this thing? Michael Bloom. Okay, so you guys can hear me, right? Okay. Make this thing bigger so I can actually see it. So I want to wait a few more minutes just to make sure that we got everybody. I see some Rainier people, NSD people, HSD people. I also kind of wanted this to be a little bit interactive, so what if I just unmute everybody and then you guys just mute yourselves? Can we just try that? Sorry, I sprung it on you.
I'm really sorry about dragging the calls over. Can you hear it? Can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear somebody. There's probably a smart way of doing this. I'm not entirely sure what that is.
Hey, Eric, is there a way to see the list of attendees in that bar?
Yeah, I can. I don't know if you guys can.
Because I'm trying to look at like the list of questions, or like if somebody's raising their hand, you can't see that.
That would be smart.
Or I can't find it at least.
Yeah, there's a questions tab. Okay, Rainier can hear me. Can't show both, I guess.
Hey, Eric, I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Okay. Cool. So I'll give it. Okay. Questions. So we're just going to wait a little bit longer just to see how many more people we get. Oh, can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, I can see it.
Cool. I think I can. Oh, I can just break this window out. Okay. Okay. This is good. I can do this. So a couple things while we're waiting. I am going to try to record this. So, I mean, I'm going to cut this first part out, but if you do want to chime in and ask something, just to let you know, it's probably going to show up in the recording. No big deal. Let me actually make sure this thing is actually recording. View and share. There were a couple of people that are interested in this that aren't from our community. There's some Australian guys, maybe some Korean people that were interested. So I might share this with them if I can record it with the audio working and get it on YouTube. So it's a lot of ifs, but that's the plan, is to try to archive this. So once we start, I'm probably going to talk a little bit about basic what Charlene is and what it does, which most of you already know. But I'm just going to do that just in case someone who doesn't know what this is doesn't get thrown into the weeds of all of this. Also, I'm talking from my desk, so I'm kind of whispering a little bit because I didn't have the right cable to do it from the room. So it's always the IT stuff. All right, I think that's good enough. So again, I'm not thinking this. I'm not thinking this is going to last for 2 hours. I put in 2 hours because I thought there might be some questions at the end. But in general, if you have a question, feel free to stop me, so we can just like expand on whatever we're talking about in the moment. I think that works best. I don't know. I don't think there's that much else to this. All right, so I'm gonna hide this. Okay, so this talk is all about Charlene 3.0. It's also the first recorded talk. So like I said, I'm going to go through a little bit of background. Charlene in general is just a tool that I developed that incorporates all the stuff that we do in what we call night processing. So that's going to include managing files, managing directory structures. It's going to include keras processing, POSPAC processing, tools that we use like Takari tides, QC tools, AutoQC, basically everything that's involved in night processing. So Charlene is also a part of the Hydra Explorer universe. So all of the other stuff that we've developed to help with all sorts of different NOAA Coast Survey problems and products is all housed within this Hydra Explorer thing. Hydra Explorer in general, if you just look at just go to Google, right, and you go to NOAA Hydra. I think it's NOAA Hydra. Yeah, you'll get the website that has the Hydra install. You just click this, and you get the install. And then Hydra supplemental data, which includes, the VDatum installation, the World Ocean Atlas, which we use to extend sound velocity casts, and then a third one. I'm going to have to look it up because it's going to bother me if I don't. What is the third one? Wait. Don't tell me. The PMVD stuff that Jack Riley's been developing. Right. So all those things that are considered supplementals because they're not really in the core part of the Hydro universe, but they're used. So if you work on a ship or an NRT and you want to use Hydro, you're going to want the supplemental data. But if you're just somebody messing around with some of the things in Hydro, it's not required. So with all the Hydro programs, when you click over here to get to it, there's going to be some stuff over here on the right, which is all the documentation that whoever wrote the program also wrote to accompany it. I've spent a relatively large amount of time on developing this documentation stuff. I don't know how useful it really is. It might not be all that useful. I do want to mention it though because it talks about a lot of stuff that I get questions on, like basic scenarios. If you're going to run with V8 and an RTX S-bit, what would that look like, right? So you have like what settings you might choose. Here's what these windows look like after you set it up to process in that specific way. So there's some good info here, if only for examples, and then maybe if you really want to get into it, you can look and see what each of these options actually includes. Right? What's tide file versus zone file versus Takari file? What does that mean? Sound velocity options, all that stuff. So there's actually a lot of information in all of these little menus. So it's worth a look. So to run it, you just go up here, you just click Run Program. You might find that Charlene takes a little while to spin up compared to maybe some of the other ones. It's mostly because it's loading components of almost everything that's in here because it automates it. So it sort of includes a bunch of stuff. So yeah, it can take a while. All right. This is the main Charlene screen. And this is Charlene 3.0. So I should mention, what do I mention first? Probably the 3.0 stuff. Okay, so if you use 2.0, and this is the first time you're seeing 3.0, there are a few differences. So before I get into what all this stuff does, I'll just go through this real quick. Most of the differences can be summed up in if I can determine what setting to use in the data, then I will remove it from here because I don't want you to have to click unnecessary buttons. So right here there was the projection, the UTM zone, which I asked you to put in. I'm getting that from data, assuming you have pause data or sound velocity cast. I think those are the two ones that I use. Over here, I've got the processing options, which used to ask you what your reference point was. So I'm getting that from data. Down here underneath the surfaces, there used to be the 4 TPU values that would ask you to put in, the same that you use in compute TPU in Keras. So those I wrapped up in a dialog, which you'll see when we run. So I'm sort of trying to simplify this as much as possible. The other big obvious visual change is I did change these modes a little bit. The basic way in which they work is the same, but I had a couple of people tell me that ship mode didn't make much sense because we're doing it on a launch or something. And really it's just a matter of, do I have data in a transfer drive or not? So I basically just took what they said and did that, which makes sense. Okay. So what do I do next? The main goal with Charlene 2.0, or okay, let's go back even further. So Charlene 1.0 was my first attempt. It was sort of the first time I actually made a program this complicated with a big interface and stuff. So it was pretty rough. I don't even know if it really went that well. I had a lot of feedback, and a lot of people had to go through testing, and it was a bit of a pain. Charlene 2.0 went pretty well, I think, and I think I hammered down processing to the point that it basically all works. I'm sure there are some instances where it doesn't work, and there have been problems, and maybe I don't even know what those problems are yet, but for the most part, I think Charlene 2.0 worked. So with Charlene 3.0, what I tried to do is think real hard about how to explain the process in a way that makes sense, because I think that's the next step, which is, okay, if you set it up right, it'll work. But how do you know if you set it up right? So that is also a great way of talking about this for people who don't know what some of these things are. So some of these menus have changed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start with these help screens. So if you don't know what Charlene is and you see launch, transfer, drive, and network, you might not know what that is. This has also been sort of a big thing that I've found going in the field, that even people who use these modes still don't really get the idea, or like why do I have to create a transfer drive? So I've done a bunch of these diagrams, and they're kind of cryptic, and maybe there's too much information. With all these PDFs, you can zoom in. They should be high res, so you should be able to get all the detail you need. But I tried real hard to make these modes clear in terms of why you have to do them. So, for instance, with launch and transfer drive, launch, transfer, drive, and network mode, it's just two different ways of giving Charlene access to your data. One involves upfront creating a structure, putting data into that structure, and then bringing the structure to Charlene. That's all a transfer drive is. So it lets you log data to specific data number folders. Gives you options for all these different modes that sort of encompass everybody's little differences in how they want to process. And then you give it to Charlene, and Charlene will take the path to the multi-beam or the side scan data number folder and find the rest, because Charlene built the transfer drive. So Charlene knows where everything is. And then Charlene will put the data in the right place, process it, blah, 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 all that stuff that we'll talk about. And then the network mode, the idea here is you don't have a structure. You just want Charlene to find the raw data in the structure that you currently have. So maybe you don't have this thing, which is a difference between you carrying data between two physical things. Maybe you're just on the ship, and your data is on the ship, and your process data is on the ship, and everything's on the ship. So you can just log raw data to folders, point Charlene at folders, and generate data. So that's basically the idea. One's a structure that Charlene creates, and then one's a structure that you plug in manually. The only other thing I get with regards to network mode and launch transfer drive is, why would I use launch transfer drive in the first place? Like, it seems like an unnecessary steps when I could just do this. Hopefully that can be seen if I just switch the mode. So now all of a sudden Charlene needs to know your project, your sheet, your vessel, your day number, needs to know all these folders, and there's just more data to enter. And granted, you have to enter that data when you create the transfer drive, but it just sort of gives you a cleaner way of accessing your data that doesn't involve entering a whole bunch of stuff. Because all of these project, sheet, vessel, day folders are just the folder names of the folders in the transfer drive. So this is the I don't know. To me, it seems like the most organized way of doing this. Okay, so I also have this guy. Okay, so this is basically the way that we process data in Keras 10 and with POSPAC and everything else. What I tried to do is I took, I had like 30 emails or something where folks who knew what they were talking about were answering questions, and they were pages long, and we've got reports that are 50 pages long, and I'm not sure that all that was the best way of getting the information out there in terms of how all of this stuff works. So again, there's like a lot of information here, and I'm not entirely sure that this is the best way of doing it either. But what I try to do is, at the very least, explain why you would set things up the way that we do, why you would check the things in these Keras processes, right, the way that we check them, and what do you get out? Right? What does merge actually do? Well, it depends. If it's with tides, it takes your observed depths and it includes water level effects and your offset, of course. And then if it's GPS tide, well, it just uses the GPS tide, which is sort of the ERS way of accounting for the GPS version of your water levels. What is the difference between if you're the TJ and you have a reference point at the IMU, or if you're basically everybody else and your reference point is at the Kongsberg transmitter? Well, it's all basically diagrammed here. Not enough room to really explain why, but I think if you take a look, you might find that you can infer why things are the way they are in this diagram. So it's not perfect. I might add more. There's always the danger of adding too much. You sort of end up where you were, where you have a 50-page report and it's impenetrable to most people, including myself, don't get me wrong. But I think this is a good step. So I'm going to try this. Put out these little diagrams. I'll probably make other ones for other processes. And I hope that sort of helps maybe a little bit in terms of understanding things. So one thing I haven't mentioned is that Charlene 3.0 supports Keras 11. So I'm not going to go, I don't know if I have time to go into what exactly is different with Keras 11. The biggest difference is this whole georeference bathymetry block, which essentially encompasses, tide, sound velocity, GPS. There is no GPS tide, but GPS vertical adjustment and compute TPU. It's all one thing, so that these processes know what options you've used in the other processes in this main process. If you remember, like sound velocity correct, you'd have to check delayed heave and then check delayed heave in merge, I think, and then also in GPS tide. Right, so you're telling it the same thing 3 times. So I think this is a good approach. To just take all these things and just treat them the way they are. They just take time series data, right? Your positioning, your attitude, your depths, and then fully correcting georeference to soundings and allow you to build a surface in the end. So I'll probably come back to this later. I'm trying to do an overview here. So suffice to say that this sort of is my attempt at explaining things a little bit. What I think of as the companion to those guys is this offset report. So if I run this guy, what's going to happen is it's going to take what I have here in Charlene, right? I have a vessel, I have a .all file, I have a pos file. It's going to take one of those. You'll notice this is the same as that, right? I just found it from what you have here. .all file, a pos file, and it's going to generate this Excel spreadsheet. Hopefully, at least. These live demos can be kind of iffy. But if I run this, Charlene is going to build this giant crazy spreadsheet. And what this is your pos file that I put in, right? It'll find your offsets. The .all file that I put in, it'll find your offsets. The HVF that I put in, it'll find your offsets. And knowing all 3 of these things, you can make some judgments. So, for instance, I know from a .all file that's a 2040. I don't know which kind because yeah. But I also know that your reference point is at the transmitter because you don't have an offset here. And so you'll notice that over here in the notes, it'll keep saying with the transmitter as the reference point, it should be this. And there's like green and red. So if you just did like HSRR or something, and you wanted to go back and look at your patch test data or something with an HVF and make sure that, right, that your, what's a good one? That your receiver offset, that your offset from IMU to RX is in here, but accounting for the Kongsberg offset, and you're like flipping sine values because you're going the other way. There's like all this stuff that's wrapped up in this report. I would have a hard time coming up with all of this in my head to explain to someone. So, again, sort of in line with trying to explain things, this is going to encompass, at the very least, what I know and what other people know about offsets and how to set up things. So I think you can take this, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to get a bunch of these. I'd like to get one of these from every boat that I know of, just so I can see what you're doing, and see if we need to change things, or see if there's any difference between boats with the same sonar or boats that are the same boats, right? See if there are differences. Maybe there's some information there that might be interesting. And then, of course, there's stuff like these supply flags that are so hard to conceptualize, and no means yes stuff. So it's a good check for that kind of stuff. So the idea is that this offset report dovetails with this, right? We talk about what do you want to do with these lever arms, and those lever arms are also in here. So these things sort of come together to give some sort of overall view of how we process data and how to do it correctly. There's probably going to be stuff that I'm going to learn where maybe my viewpoint is a little bit too draconian, and there are other ways of doing it that are slightly different, and maybe I shouldn't give people yes, no values at the end and say you have to do it this way. So this is just my attempt. I don't know for sure. I'll be interested to see what people think, and yeah, any feedback about this kind of thing is definitely helpful to me, at least. Okay. So, Keras 11, there are a few other things besides the georeference bathymetry. One that, I still have this up? I should probably just stop closing this, huh? One that only affects the TJ is, I believe it only affects TJ, is the heave lever arm and the IMU here. So if your reference point is at the IMU, you'll see in Keras 10, you need to have this reverse lever arm in the heave, because delayed heave is relative to the pause, and the heave in the .all file, the way we do it with a reference point at the IMU, needs to be overridden with delayed heave. So you have to have inverse lever arm here. Where in Keras 11, they take that into account. So you don't have to have the lever arm. So that took some doing. We were doing a lot of tests, a lot of back and forth with Keras. Some clarification on how we do things was definitely brought up. And we've definitely validated that this is the right way to do it. It's a little unfortunate that we still have to load delayed heave to account for this problem. But the short answer is that for 11, if your reference point is at the TX, you're basically fine. If your reference point is at the IMU, we'll need to talk about this heave lever arm in the HVF. Zeroing that out. So that's one thing that's in 11. There's some better news, at least. There was a long-standing problem with Charlene 2.0 in which you would create a new project in Charlene just by processing your first day. And then would come in, and your project coordinate system would always be WGS 84. Because Charlene, when it converts, doesn't have control over the project coordinate system. Well, they added something in 11, so you shouldn't have that problem anymore. You should no longer have to go in and change your coordinate system of the CARES project after you process your first day. The way that I handle CARES 11, Charlene is backwards compatible, so right, just based off of the main screen, I'm expecting 10.3 or greater in terms of version, but if you have 10, you can run it like this. If you have 11, you can run it like this. So it looks the same between 10 and 11. I didn't put in a switch, so I didn't put in a way to switch between 10 and 11, and I did that intentionally. I'm a little bit worried about what would happen if the user had to go back and forth a couple times. Maybe there might be an instance where you accidentally process a day in the wrong version. I really didn't want that to happen. So if you want to process in Keras 10, you have to make sure you don't have Keras 11 installed. If you have Keras 11 installed, Charlene will use Keras 11. If that turns out to be a big deal, I can build a switch. But I'm sort of thinking that, once we go to Keras 11 for this year, you won't really need to access Keras 10 anymore. That's just what I'm thinking. I could be wrong. I guess we'll find out. But the short answer is, whatever the latest version of Keras you have installed, whatever that version is, Charlene's going to use it. So just be careful about what version you're expecting Charlene to run in. In terms of other new things, we've had changes in the directory structure between 2017 and 2018. I haven't really seen a 2019 change. That might come later on, but this is equivalent. This is good for 2019. So whatever the latest year here is going to be the appropriate one to run for that year. Maybe I'll make it 2019 and make it equivalent. I don't know. So the way I'm set up right here is fine for 2019. So Keras 11, there's a big change in terms of, I think these are Keras 11 projects. There's a big change in terms of within the project, you'll have this HIPS file, right, your Keras project. And then ordinarily you would have vessel and then day folders. So in Keras 11, what it's going to do is it's going to process all your line folders right next to the HIPS file. I'm anticipating this might be a bit of an annoyance if you have like 1,000 lines. And they're talking about taking these raw data index files, putting them in a separate folder, so it's not a ton of stuff right in this sheet folder. But I had to do a bunch of stuff in Charlene to accommodate the fact that you might have vessel and day folders if it's Keras 10, and you might have just line folders if it's Keras 11. So that was kind of annoying. The HIPS files changed a little bit in terms of how it interprets day folders. So you might not even have noticed this, but in Charlene 2.0 in Keras 10, this day folder could basically be anything, because all it was a folder that contains line folders, and then in Keras, it'll just show whatever your line folder name is as the day number, or whatever the day number folder is as the day number. But in Keras 11, it's doing an SQL query. So whatever you have for day number, this has to literally be the day number for these lines. If you have lines that cross into the next day, that might be a problem. So I'm not entirely sure how big of a problem that's going to be, but you need to be careful about crossing UTC day and how you process those 2 days as one day. And that's not just Charlene. I'm pretty sure in conversion you're just specifying day number, and it's going to use that as the actual day when you process. So day number is important, whereas before it was just a label. Those are all the high points for Keras 11. So there's going to be some more direction. This isn't your one-stop shop for Keras 11 details. I know that John DeRoba, one of my coworkers, is going to be putting out some more recommendations in terms of Keras 11. So there'll be some more info there. Okay. I think that's all I had for new stuff in terms of those things. So some other basic Charlene stuff. Okay, so when you first start Charlene and you've run it before, you come up with these things. You come up with all of these settings, right? Charlene just loads these. What it's doing is it's loading it from this batch processor file that's in your documents. If I close Charlene and I remove this file, and then I run Charlene, eventually it opens up and there's no settings. So if I open and if I open a saved session, boom, all the settings come up. So the session file is how all these settings exist, where they come from. So you can go in, you can save a new one, right? I have like, oh, right, you're going to get a little demo of this. Ignore this for a second. I have like a library of session files just because, right, if you have a project set up where you're looking for one folder and like the next folder is just like 143 or something, right, you can just change this and find the next day. And then, I think there's a 5 in this one. There might not be, it might be just 2 and 3. Anyway, all these are going to be the same settings for multiple days. So if you have a transfer drive with a bunch of days, you can just have one session. But anyway, session file retains all these settings. So if I go back to the way it was, and then I talk about the settings themselves. So there's only 3 options now. There's no more reference point. You just pick multi-beam. For now, we'll just talk about transfer and process. Transfer drive, WS84. This is the, you know what, we should talk about transfer drives first. Sorry, I had a bit of a revelation that I was skipping something. Right, because we mentioned transfer drives, but we haven't actually created one. So that's probably a good first step. So what you would do is before you would go out to survey, right, you would create a transfer drive, at the very least for that day. So if I show you, let's say I've got like, right, this is a hard drive that I have. I think it's going to go away, yeah. So if I browse to that It's gonna try to find projects and sheets, which won't make any sense because this is just a regular hard drive. Like if I had like an actual thing with projects on it, it'd find like projects with sheets. It'll find like the days that are in the project, right? So this whole like auto-populate thing is just a way of accessing the transfer drive and seeing what projects and sheets are in there. So in this instance, I have a bunch, and they all have like different vessels that'll, well, maybe not this one, but that'll pop up here and allow you to just add a day. And all right, see that pops up. You know, you just add a day and then move on. Anyway, I'll demo that. But so if I just start a blank one right here, just call it project sheet. If you're a ship and you got a bunch of launches, you can add additional vessels. You want this to be the vessel name. So if your HVF is like a vessel, that HVF is just gonna be like a vessel. Let's make it like yesterday. And then if you just want it to be one day, you just want to, this will be 2 days. So if you want it to be one day, it would just be this. 2 days, it'll be this. And this is sort of like those 12-hour processing boats. So if you have a day, but it's 2 days because you break at noon and you want to process AM and PM separately, you check this and you get those AM PM folders. But for us, I just want to create those 2 days. So we'll bring this guy back. You'll see there's a project, a sheet, a data, and then space for our 2 days and multi-beam. If I check side scan, there'd be vessels here, but I just checked multi-beam. And then so you take this hard drive out on the boat or whatever, and you would you log data, put the data on the hard drive, right? You put multi-beam in here, you put positioning in here, and sound velocity. Those are the big three if you're doing multi-beam processing. And then you come back here. Maybe I should ship both screens. You come back here. And you take this and you put it here. All right, you get something like this. So, right, I put it in for the multi-beam day number folder, and it saw project sheet, vessel, day, project sheet, vessel, day, and then it found no files because there are no files. But then if I pointed at something that I've created already for this test, multi-beam, this one I believe, finds all the files. So these are the files that I have in this specific transfer drive. Project, sheet, vessel, day. Same deal. HVF I broke off because people wanted to put their HVFs not just in the transfer drive, but maybe just have a centralized place with all of the HVFs, which makes sense. So that's why HVFs are separate. Let me get back to here where we were. So this window here is a great way of making sure that you actually have the path here and here that you want. Right, so your HVF needs to be equal to your vessel folder, so those should be the same without the HVF. And they are, so that's good. Here you should find the .all files, .all files and pos files and everything that you had for that day, so you can double check that here. You'll notice in this one I had it set up when I loaded the session file, it loaded 2017, so I'll change that.
Yes.
This changes because this is where your data is going. So, right, root of the raw data drive. This could represent like your G drive or H drive or something if you're on a NetApp or your server or wherever you put your data. It's just going to take this path and it's going to build the project directory structure here. These can be the same thing if you want. Then you just end up with one structure, like equivalent to what you'd use to submit. It's split up because most people have separate drives for raw and process data. Sorry, I'm like losing my voice. Are there any questions? Is everybody on board so far? I think everybody is. Okay. Let's see these settings. These are all your TIDE options. So this sort of reinforces the nice thing about Charlene. So TIDE and zone file are going to load either a TIDE file or a ZDF file in Keras. Takari is going to load Takari tides via the Pydro tool, the Pydro Takari tool. Right, so it's one little drop-down box where you choose different things, whichever one you want to do, and you don't have to go back and forth between programs, which is nice. These are all your sound velocity options. Here's some distance and time. 4 hours is usually what we do, I believe. You see we got a VDatum file here that I'm loading with delayed heave. Right, and then I've got delayed heave here. The problem though, if I do this, what it's going to do is it's going to use the ggk height in the .all file to run that through GPS tides, merge, etc. And the ggk file, the ggk height in the .all file is only DGPS grade, so it's not worth much. It's going to be pretty bad. So we actually don't want that. What we actually want is an SBET. So what this is going to do is it's going to go run POSPEC in the background, generate an SBET, load the height navigation from the SBET in Charlene, along with the delayed heave from the 000 files, assuming that you have 000 files, and move on from there. GPS tides with VDatum, a surface, whatever. So when I talk about, where is it? The ERS example, right? RTK SBET VDatum with heave sort of represents the ERS workflow that we currently have. There's some assumptions here, right? You have to wait a little while after you get POS files to generate an RTX SBET. So it's not perfect. It's not a perfect idea, right? To have to wait to then run this if you want to get SBET within this workflow. There's another way of doing it that I'll show you later, but for right now, we'll just do it this way. Because this takes 20 minutes and I want to get it started. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and make a raster 1 meter surface. Here's a VDatum. Let's do this because I want to illustrate a few things. I'm going to screw up my project a little bit just to show you a couple things. Okay, so we have it set up for this day, this arbitrary day that I've already had on my data storage system. And then we're just going to go processing, we're going to run. So what it's going to do here is it's going to go through all of these pre-checks. And it's going to break pretty soon. So the pre-checks are just my way of saying, okay, I know that you have these options, and I know that you have these files, and I know where the files are, and I know what these options do. So if I'm not lazy, which is debatable, I should be able to take all of this stuff and basically know whether this process is going to work. Here, for instance, I know that you probably entered the wrong HVF. A, it doesn't exist, and B, it doesn't match your transfer drive. All right, so go in here, check this thing. Okay, well, fine, I put a 2 in, right? So try it again. And don't get me wrong, I know this is annoying. Run this thing 9 times just to find out that you missed one thing. So in this case, I've already run this. And what it's saying is it already found data, right? These exact files. And I'm saying, are you sure you want to overwrite this data? Because you probably don't. So I'm going to hit no here. Because I forgot, after I tested it, to delete the process data. Let me just do that. Why did I forget? Oh, I forgot to delete the raw data. Okay. I pre-checked myself. Great. And right. Let's start. So it should break one more time. Just to fully illustrate how obnoxious this is. Great. So, this one's a little bit cryptic, I guess. Basically, I found that you've got a VDatum service that's got NAD83 written. Or, sorry, you've got a Charlene setup that's got NAD83 written all over it. And then you've got a VDatum file that's got WGS84 in the file name. So I'm saying, hey, maybe that's not right. It's probably not right. So, okay, I'd be like, okay, I forgot I should be in WGS84. And I'll say, okay. Did I forget something? Oh, I did. I was going to check the QC tool stuff. That's fine. I'm pretty sure. No, I don't want to test that. Okay, so what I've done is, here's another one, right? There used to be, in all these SBIT options, different runs for different antennas. I'm just taking some of the stuff that was annoying and making it so in dialog. And it's going to retain whatever you pick, because you're probably not going to change antennas that often. So Zephyr 2, I believe, is appropriate here. Okay, and then we get to the TPU options that used to be right here. I got a lot of questions about what those actually are. Like, it was a little bit confusing because it wasn't shown in the same way that compute TPU shows those values. So I thought about it, and I'm like, okay, well, there's really only a couple modes. 99% of the time, you're going to be in this VData mode, where you don't really have any measured tide uncertainty because you're not measuring tides. You have a zone uncertainty because you get that when you create the VData model. And then you have these SV values that you're used to from putting in depending on how you take CAS. Right? So that's probably what I want. All right, now it's going to start the transfer. It's going to go real fast because I picked a small project. But, okay, so what I've done is I've created a directory structure. Transferred files. All right, here's my raw data. I just made all of this just here in the last 10 seconds. Here's my multibeam files, right? I just transferred them. They're all in the structure. 2018 NOAA INI positioning and stuff. Yeah. It's all here. Okay, it already transferred. It's finished. It verified the transfer's fine, and boom, now it's an SBIT. I can't even keep up with it. So right now it's running the pause pack batch process, which is going to take all those pause files. It's going to extract all the relevant groups and messages, right? The ones that you go into POSMV and set up 1, 3, 10, 20, that whole thing. It's going to take all those. It's going to build a pause pack project. It's going to do all of the, right, it's going to download ephemeris. It's going to do the initial GNSS processing. It's going to download an RTX solution for your area. It's going to process the RTX and the GNSS and the differential correction. It's going to generate an SBET. Oh, I did have a few things, right? So I had a lot of feedback about SBETs. So a lot of people were saying that the SBET processing in Charlene seemed to be less reliable, resilient than the SBET processing in POSPAC. And it turns out, I think that's actually true. I think that we found that POSPAC batch seems to not handle errors quite as well as the POSPAC GUI that you run. The big one that I found is if you run an RTX SBET and it just sits there in loops, what it's doing probably is trying to hit the RTX server that a Planix owns, and it's unable to download that corrector. So that's sort of a long-standing RTX problem that Planix has said that they've put in additional servers to support the load that they're getting with the RTX, the popularity of RTX. So hopefully that's going to get better. But I found that I get that more often in batch than I do in the GUI. That might be like totally just my experience, and maybe I'm just sensitive to it. That does seem to be true. So what I've done is I've tried to take the solvable problems. I can't solve a Planix not being able to support the RTX user base that they have. What I can do is I can take IMU data gaps, POSPAC POSPAC solution status drops, right, where you get a processing problem because you drop in a dead reckoning because you drive under a bridge or something, so you get a quote-unquote data gap, which is really just a solution gap, probably. So I built in logic using the Planix IMU scan utility and some other things to take what you would normally do, which is I have a data gap. I'll make process SBET A for the part before the gap and SBET B for the part after the gap. So Charlene now automatically does that, assuming that the gap is an IMU problem or a solution status problem. Those are the only two that I check, because those are the only real ones I can learn about so far. I've seen some issues where you have an IMU gap and the IMU scan doesn't even find it. So there probably still will be problems, but hopefully it's a little bit more reliable and a little bit less effort in handling these gaps in the future. So if you have been doing SBETs manually because you find them to be more reliable, I would ask you just to give it a shot in Charlene, especially with RTX, because I think it's better. Also with SBETs, I found that a lot of people are saying, hey, this thing just says complete here after it finishes, even when it breaks. So now you get a little bit of a message here and the bar will turn red if you got a problem. And I'll talk more about what you do when it breaks after it finishes. It'll be a little bit more obvious. Okay. I had some other things, but I want to do it after this finishes. Oh, sorry. Noah Ship Rainier has their hand up. Hey.
Howdy. We have a couple questions about this SBET process.
Sure.
Hey, it's Greg Gallagher. Just a quick question. Is there a way to auto QC or manual QC the SBET before it gets applied to the data? Is there a way to like stop the process of application?
Yeah, right. So what I currently have is in create. I have this utility to create an SBED. I think I might have shown this to you guys, so maybe you're wondering if there's something other than this that exists. But my thought was that if you want to do SBED, create an SBED outside of this process to check it first, you could run it in here. So you can just pick, where your data is, where you want it to go, where you want your SBED RMS file to go, the method, etc., and then run it. And this will basically just do this, just outside of this process.
So that would, are we? No, you're fine. Sorry, Greg again. So if we did this, this would be a separate, basically letting Charlene process it, and then it would spit out the auto QC results, and we could decide then to apply it. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you would do RTX. If you check auto QC, it'll ask you for the HVF to get the water line and the tide file. Only if you want to really check the datum section. So what you would do is you would probably first thing in Charlene tools, create SBED, right? It runs, it generates an SBED, and then you go down here and you just do load SBED, and then it'll ask you for those files. So it becomes a two-step process. Create SBED, check SBED. Well, that's 3 steps. Create SBED, check SBED, and then load SBED with everything else in Charlene.
Very cool.
I had a quick question, Eric. You mentioned that it'll go through and get all the ephemeris data and what have you automatically if we run it in the fully automated version. What happens if we either lose internet or those files aren't available yet? Is it going to pop up or?
With the ephemeris, it'll try ultra rapid. That's like 4 hours. If that's not there in the batch, I believe it fails GNSS processing. So I should mention, right, if this fails, it's true, Charlene will just continue to run. What it does is it downgrades to just using the 000 delayed heave and the height from the .all file, which is non-ideal. But that's basically
But
what
it'll
it
give
does.
us a pop-up that says that happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you guys find that happens a lot?
Well, I mean, we have internet problems pretty regularly on our ship.
Yeah.
So.
But I mean, specifically with the ephemeris?
I mean, I don't know specifically with that. I was just kind of
Chance.
Yeah, I was just kind of worst case scenarioing it, wanting to know how it would respond.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spotlight there. No, you'll have right. There's all sorts of things. There's no internet can't get ephemeris. No internet can't get RTX. It's too soon for RTX or ephemeris. All of those problems. I really didn't want to just stop it. I thought that it would be better to just finish with delayed heave and .all height, and then you go back and just load SBED, because you probably have a problem anyway, so you're gonna have to do it manually. But yeah, this bar will go red, and then if it's an error that I've seen before, it should even tell you what actually went wrong right here, like a data gap problem or something with GNSS processing or something. It should tell you that.
Eric, is there an option for load delayed heat with poor man's VDatum, or we just choose VDatum?
So with poor man's VDatum, you're still getting a Caesar with set values, right?
I believe so.
Yeah, you would actually use it the same way.
Okay.
I guess I'm now on record for having said that, so I should probably do my due diligence and make sure. All this does is in Keras, it does not compute separation model. It does compute GPS tides with a Caesar. So So as long as that Caesar has a value and it has a band name that makes sense, because I have to know what the band name is, it's kind of silly. It'll work. There's some other modes that I didn't really talk about because they're not really in use much, and it's about to finish in like 3 seconds. But if you're doing, oh, there it is. Okay, so this is new, but let me finish this real quick. Behind this, if you're doing like RTK, for instance, and you want to use the height from the 000 file, this would allow you to do that. If you're running Marine Star and you don't want to include the RMS height because the real-time RMS height is reported incorrectly, you can use this option. So there are a few other options that have sort of become legacy because very few people are using this. But those also exist in terms of the pause options.
Eric, is there a single base SBET option?
Is there? No, apparently not. I can build that though.
Would you mind? Because I think we might be doing, at least Rainier might be applying some of those this season. We are still going to set up some base stations.
So the single base station that you set up yourself would be a different workflow.
Yes.
That's not just use a POSPAC built-in station. That's like your own station.
Correct.
I would have to think about that one.
If it's too hard, no big deal. We'll still do it the manual way, but we're just going to do it for consistency, for checking some of our RTX ones.
Yeah, I'll think about that. I mean, building it into here maybe would be easier, but I don't see any reason why I couldn't build it in here. I just have to think about it. I'll put it on my list.
Any more questions? Thank you, Eric.
Yeah, of course. Single base proc. Okay. Okay. So Charlene just did like 12 things in 3 seconds. And I want to run through this real quick because I think this is going to become more important in the future. So I created a service, a 1 meter raster service. As you see, Charlene did the georeference bathymetry. It created a service. And then it did an export to a TIFF. It ran some stuff to get like stats on the TIFF and a shapefile and a bunch of other stuff. Super low effort, not taking a lot of time to run, so I just threw it in by default. And if you look at the processed working surfaces folder, so this is outside of our structure, just a working folder that isn't going to be submitted but includes all the surface related stuff that I create. You'll see a few things. So here we bring up Keras, right? So Keras pops up when Charlene finishes with your project. Not with surfaces, because it turns out I can't run Charlene from, not Charlene, I can't run Keras from the command line with two arguments, right? One argument being the project and one being the surface, so I have to choose one. So I open the project and you have to drop in the surface. There it is. It's just like a test thing, so it's not perfect. And then I also create this TIFF. Right, there's a TIFF. And then I create this shapefile. Right? Do I have 10? I do. Shaboom. Shapefile. So what I'm doing is I'm building some stuff that I'm going to use hopefully sometime soon to automate the reporting that you guys do of metrics for processing days. This is sort of like preliminary. Like we still have to work out how this actually works, and we've been talking about it a little bit, but I'm trying to position Charlene in a way that if you need to figure out, square nautical miles and extents and stats on all of that stuff, Charlene can then just gather that information automatically and then push it out. So every time Charlene runs our log information about the process here, and of course it does. Now everybody gets me watch me put in a password. Probably fail. Oh, first try. Okay. So every time Charlene runs, it spits out a row of this. This information all gets shoved to the server we have here, and it's got all these metrics and things. You'll notice that it's got this well-known text version of the shapefile. So I actually have extents and all the information that you probably need to automate reporting for processing, so that you don't have to do all of those things that we have to do to get metrics everywhere. We're still working out how that is actually going to work. But I want to make sure that we're not waiting on us to get this information in a way that doesn't involve pestering you guys. So I'm bringing this up, A, to show you that it exists and that I'm getting all this stuff. And B, because I want to be totally transparent. I'm not logging anything weird. This is just like the stuff that Charlene, settings that are in Charlene, and like the miles that you acquire. And that's why, where's Charlene? That's why Charlene does all this stuff. This is all it is. I'm getting all this metrics, pushing it. It'll say, wait, where is it? Saved. Oh, I have it overwritten for me, so I don't fill this thing up with my own runs. So it skips it if it's me, but everybody else, it'll show right here. It'll say writing the database, and we talked about bandwidth a little bit already. The bandwidth of this is like below any other like download that you do in like a pause pack or anything else. So it's like not even really a thing.
Eric, can I just ask a question about this?
Yeah, who is this?
It's Droba.
Oh, hey.
I've seen it, but I'm not really familiar with it. But what if somebody runs a process twice? Like, let's say they process it and go through the, transfer and process, and then they realize they messed up, and then they run it again. Does that double down on these stats?
Yep.
Or is there a way to? Okay.
Yeah, just like this. Like, you'll see there's like here you got like 4 of the same one.
Okay.
Which is fine.
Yeah,
you can tell by looking at this what happened in each run, right? If it's a transfer and then you reprocess and then you transfer, right? You can sort of figure out what's going on and which one to use.
So yeah, you guys are still automating this. I'm guessing this was with Megan Greenaway, right?
Yeah, so this is all real preliminary.
Okay.
We still have to work out how to handle all this, but
okay.
Trying to automate this in a way that you don't have to like rely on getting the data and then emailing information about the data when you already know what the data is. So it's like Charlene and everything associated with Charlene is just built to reduce the effort of the people in the field. It's like just duplicating stuff. Okay. And then the other thing that pops up is this thing, which I'm pretty happy about. So this is like a status report of your entire process and how it went. I had this, a bunch of people, right? We were talking a little bit, I can't show you, but the progress bars, right? How do I know if an SBET failed and why it failed? That's the goal of this. This is supposed to take all of your processes, tell you which lines it worked on, which lines it didn't work on, and then take all of these warnings and errors. And then for each one, I've just written a little thing that sort of explains, at the very least, what I know about, or what we know about the warning or the error. This is going to be a work in progress, but it sort of at least gives you an idea when it finishes of what actually happened. There's another way of doing that, which is, I think, probably better, although it's a little bit annoying, is to, oh boy, I'm going to find out that Eric doesn't know how to use Keras 11. If I go into track lines, and I hide this so I can see my actual lines, and I click on one. Right, so we should all be at least somewhat familiar with this log viewer thing. So this is another good way to see what actually happened and how everything processed. So it's all in there. You can scroll through all the lines and see if one, didn't have an SBET line or something. Yeah.
Hey, Eric.
Yep.
2 questions. If we could just real quick go back to your spreadsheet of Doom, the one that, nope, the other one before that. The one that had all the logs for everything that had been processed through Charlene.
The site. Yeah, right. This guy?
Yeah, the database. Yeah, that guy. So, is there any way, it kind of looks like this might eventually lead to replacing at least parts of the SDAT that we normally have to put in. I guess question 1, is that the eventual intent of some of this?
Yeah, so I'm being intentionally a little bit cryptic because I don't want to we're sort of in the process of talking with OMEO, like John said, Megan Greenaway is sort of leading this thing. And they're sort of in the process of rewriting a lot of the SDAT stuff anyway. So we're talking about how to get our information and their information and do away with reporting multiple times. So we've been working on that for months, but it's going to take a long time, I think.
That's fair enough. Is there any way for us to have access to this so that when we were filling in our SDAT, this would be really convenient?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so it's in Hybase. I think I'll have to talk to Chen. So, because Chen sort of controls the access. But if you take Hybase, right, and you just change this to benchmark, you get the benchmark site. But I'm not entirely positive that a Hybase logon gives you benchmark table access. So I'll put it on my list and I'll get back to you.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure.
And then going now back to that Excel spreadsheet that you just showed us, with all of the kind of passy-fail kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Where does Charlene dump that?
Oh, right. Okay. So I wanted to go through this because I think a lot of people didn't know this existed. So I didn't do a very good job of explaining all this stuff. But, it depends on your NOAA INI. So if you're doing the 2018, the latest, it'll be in acquisition and processing logs. And then processing logs. So there's a couple of things in here that I want to talk about, but let me write this note down so I don't forget. Benchmark access for ops. Okay. So a couple of things here. First of all, right, so status report is this thing that I'm showing you back here. This is sort of the same thing, but this sort of serves as a processing log. more than a status thing, because I think there's information here that is more for stats than for letting the user know if it worked. So that's why there's two, and they sort of do the same thing. If you skip out of the day and you go into the vessel level, right, processing logs, vessel, there'll be this thing, which is the same thing. But what you'll find is if you have, where do you go? If you have multiple days, these are all going to show up as tabs in here. So in the end, you might have, right, this is going to be your vessel concatenated processing log. And you can click through all these tabs to see what's going on with this process. And then the log keras is everything that spits out in Charlene super fast. It's all going to be in here. And then, okay, I'll leave that. The log of Planix is everything that spits out when you process your POSPAC batch thing. And I log the settings too, because I think it's useful. If you run it and there's a gap and you're like, oh crap, I forgot one of these files, right? I'll know because it's 00 to 016. Sometimes we'll have a problem where I'll find out that you have POS files, but they're not all the same name with an incrementing extension. Like this is, POSPAC requires this, basically. And that's how POSMV logs natively, so you don't want to mess with that. Just a random note there about POSPAC. And, oh, right, so this is all the benchmarking information that I log. So if you look at like this guy again, this is what this originally was. It was just a way of benchmarking networks and machines. These last options, if you are ever curious, I'm not entirely sure why you would be, but if you were curious where I got these numbers from, they're just summaries of this information. So that's where that came from. You'll see some of these have like extents equals none or SNM equals none. So if you don't create a surface in Charlene, you won't get this information. So if there's ever an instance in the future where like, shapefile extents and squares are required to be submitted by Charlene as statistics or something, we're basically going to need to require you to run a surface in Charlene. That's where that comes from. Makes sense? Okay. So that's all the logs, I think. This is legacy. I'm going to get rid of this. All of your errors are going to show in here. Any other questions? None so far? I think I had a few things I was going to talk about in these menus. Oh, right. Yeah, of course. I talked about those guys. I didn't talk about these guys. So I did break out some of this stuff, right, that runs at the end in here. If you give this guy a TIFF, it'll calculate the squares from it. A couple of people asked me for this, so I just built that in as a separate thing, if you're just curious. All this does is generate a TIFF, and then, creates a shapefile from the TIFF to then, in GDL, calculate squares. Not too exciting. If you run Charlene for 10 days and you have 10 TIFFs or something and you want to merge it to be a single TIFF, you can do that in here. Just like how in Keras you can merge Caesars, I had a couple people ask me for this. You just check this and it'll give you squares too. And then there's Chucky. So Chucky is sort of like a batch Charlene processor. So we had a couple instances where someone said, hey, I've got a whole project with days, but I need to process each day differently with different files, but I want to do it all in one click, right? Just like how Charlene is one click. So Charlene handles individual days. So I built something that handles individual Charlenes, sort of. And I do that by going in here, taking a save session file, right, that we talked about. Taking this guy, taking a folder, and just saving a bunch of these sessions, one for each day. And then, right, does that make sense? So I have, right, day 142, file, save session, put it in a folder. 143, and maybe I want this one to not have an SPAD. File, save session, put it in a folder. And then tools, Chucky, just point it at that folder. What's the folder again? Charlene, Chucky. You probably want to name them as day numbers because it kind of makes sense and lets you keep track of which one is which. I don't even remember how I set up these lines. That'll probably work, but if I hit OK, what it's going to do is it's going to double check. Oh yeah, I didn't find the data. Anyway, I didn't set this up for an actual run, but what it does is it checks each session file, right? Makes sure they're OK, and then runs Chucky for each day. So its elapsed time is 0 because I didn't find the data because I have been changing a few things around here. But it's going to do each of those individual sessions sequentially. So you can process a whole project of session files with one click and just leave it running over the weekend. And I've done that a couple times for people. It's been kind of useful. So that's the Chucky idea. There is a way of doing this in Python that I do, and I haven't really exposed it too much. I certainly can if people are interested in this idea of a Charlene API. It exists, and I've used it a little bit. But for the most part, I think saving these session files and then running a folder of session files makes more sense. And I think if you look at the Hydro, Chucky, I sort of talk about that a little bit more if you really want to run this in Python. Yeah, I mean, the only other thing is, right, I have some reference frame stuff. Calendar. I just took all the little things that I keep having to Google to find out what to put in boxes and things. And I just built that in here. Makes it kind of useful. You just access it real quickly. All right, let's see. I think that's all I had for the most part. I will say, since I do have half an hour, there was one thing that used to be in Charlene that I've broken out. Is this shoreline attributing machine that I designed? It just takes in a 000 with observed depth and observed time, assuming you're doing like a tides thing, and then does all of the waterline calculations and spits out a fully processed S57 file. It takes forever to run. So that used to be in Charlene, but we broke it out here because it was kind of weird that it was in Charlene. It's sort of a separate thing. Yeah, and there's ERS stuff in here as well. It's probably going to be more useful in the future. Yeah, I don't know if I really need to demo this, but it's sort of off topic. But this also exists, and it just processes shoreline data for the most part. All right. Oh, I have questions, possibly. Okay. Yeah, so the TPU thing. I think I understand what this person is saying. That might be worth a little bit more discussion. Okay, so if I run this, oh, this is gonna be a new one. If I run Charlene again, just to get to the TPU dialog. Oh, I found. Yeah, so here's another one, right? I found files that exist that span multiple days, so that's going to be a problem. I'll hit yes to continue just because I want to get to this dialog. Yeah, so the TPU dialog, maybe worth a little bit more explaining. So, because I breezed through this, so the vdatum one, right? Time measured is none because you're not. Right, I sort of talked about this one, but take the Takari one for instance, right? You would put 0 here ordinarily, and I'm not giving you the option to put anything in because I know that it has to be 0. So that's why these are 0, and then your sound velocity stuff basically always stays the same. For zone tides, these are sort of recommended values. You'll again get uncertainty from the PI for what to put in for zones. And then the tide file custom is sort of like free-for-all handling for if you don't want to be constrained by one of these modes. You can do whatever in here, basically. A lot of this stuff, where's my... Well, okay, so a lot of this stuff, like this 1 meter per second for casts, every 15, whatever, this is from the FBM. This is like just generic guidelines that existed for, I don't know, as long as I've been around at least. And we're all pretty comfortable, I think, at this point with what we want to put in here, but I just put the guidelines in just for the heck of it, just to put something there. For all those, if you cancel, it just kicks you back out. Where was the... I did sort of breeze past this one. Oh, I should mention, right, the offset report, this thing that I just created, again, a second one of. It always puts it by the HVF, which, in my case, I'm probably going to find that there's a ton of them, and there are. I've run this 6 times now on the same HVF, probably. So it just puts it right next to the HVF. And when you run Charlene, and I process, right, this is where I pointed Charlene to push process data to. It's going to copy and update the HVF that exists for HDCS in the vessel config. Vessel config in Keras 11, since they're sort of trying to go away from HVF files, isn't a folder that's created by default in Keras, but I create it in 11 because I still want to put your HVF somewhere. So even in 11, when this isn't created automatically, I still create it. Right, so all your HVFs would be here. But I want to bring this up because I also have some guidelines here for uncertainty. And some of this comes from that same FPM section. And some of it I made up because, for instance, I know that all these come straight from the spec sheet, so I assume that we're all using the same pause systems, which I think we are, so some of this I just put in. Okay, that's all I know about uncertainty. Configuration. Yeah, okay, so the all these little dialogues, for the most part, should all come up with whatever you entered last. In this instance, I'm trying to drive the transfer drive from what you already have. I'm sort of assuming that with a transfer drive, you just have a drive that is a transfer drive and has like a couple days of raw data, right? Because like I created this one, right? It's got project sheet, whatever, project sheet, right? My transfer drive. I just created this one. And that way, when I open the create launch transfer drive, and let's say I just wanted to create the next day, I can just do that and hit OK, and it's super quick, right? There's the next day. It's right next to the day that I had previously. And then I can go in and OK, the next day. And of course, I mean, I could just do this for, however long I think I'm going to be out there, right? To just create a bunch of folders. And just to reiterate, right, so those are all going to be in everything that I'm assuming you're going to have for multi-view. All of these things. So yeah, all the dialogues should retain the last used value.
Hey, Eric, another question.
Yeah.
You were talking about the vessel offset report, and I was just sitting here thinking, because I know in HIPS 11, you can create an HVF from your data if you don't have an HVF. Would it be possible maybe in the future to use this offset report to create an HVF? Like you can read from the HVF, can you write to it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. HVF is just XML, I think.
Yeah.
Pretty
like
sure.
What, if somebody, let's say for some reason somebody saved, they saved all their data on the network, and the network, the drive goes down or something like that, and they have to, salvage what they can. They have to create an HVF. This would be one way to do it, maybe in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly could. I will say that with creating an HVF, I would argue that it would be worth just asking one of us. Like, I know you guys are totally competent in all of these things, but with offsets and HVFs and things, it's better to just, as a group, do it so that you don't make a mistake. Because I make mistakes, we all make mistakes, and there's so many, I mean, look at all this stuff. Where is it? I've closed it again. It's unbelievable. Why have I closed it again? All right, hold on a second. Charlene. I'm definitely hearing what you're saying, and I agree. In fact, I've thought about it a bunch of times because it's so easy. It would be so easy for me to take this and do the reverse and build an HVF because it already exists. I had to build it anyway to read from an HVF. But I think being in the business of automating HVFs is probably a dangerous one. So I haven't done it yet. Right? Because look at all this information. I mean, it would be so easy to do this incorrectly in some way. I think the best way to do it is have multiple people involved, double checking each other. Okay, I got some questions, and then Mike Annis with the raised hand. Can you speak? Oh, do I have to unmute you? I don't know how this works. I'm not trained in the system.
We all have the ability to unmute ourselves. You took that off, so Mike's probably got himself muted.
Oh, his mic's not working. Okay. Well, let me, if you want to write your question, I'll answer it. And then Michelle has had a few questions. The HVF report does not go to a specific location. I haven't built that in. Right now, it just goes right next to the HVF. So here's my HVF. Here's the report it creates. I could probably build that in. I was just lazy on that one little thing. And then the created HVF from Karis Love and routine historic observation. So I'm not creating an HVF. Do you mean this report? So the report is just going to deal with the last day number in the HVF. And I'm not generating any HVFs. Oh, sorry. Okay, unmuted.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, maybe I'm missing something here, but if Karis is moving away from even the HVF in general, I know just thinking the HVF we kind of use as a historic reference point sometimes too to modify and keep track of how things change over the years.
Oh, I see.
So I don't know, it maybe would be interesting to, especially as we're like coming up on an HSRRing all this stuff, it would be interesting to see if we could get like an offset report from the different day numbers that are available in the HVF.
Yeah, I mean, would you? So I guess a couple things. There is a reason why we're still using HVFs, even though you don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really just for this stuff.
Okay.
So all of this stuff is stuff that isn't, right, all of this is in the data.
Mm-hmm.
All of this we just manually put in the HVF. So they don't have a system for no HVF processing where you can manually put this in yet. That's probably going to happen. Well, I can't say probably, but I would imagine they would probably have some idea of accomplishing this if they want us to move away from HVFs, because they know that we won't until they do that. But with the offset report, I can certainly build that in if you want to like query. What would I do? Because the problem is that all of this isn't going to be day number specific.
No.
Right. So it's like.
But for things like dynamic draft.
Yeah, dynamic draft. I have it on my list to build that in so you can see that.
Okay. Because that would be interesting. That's something that changes dynamically.
It's true.
But it would be interesting to see, again, how that varies from year to year, or even as we take things on and off the boat.
Yeah. I guess that and waterline.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'll have to think about it. I'll put it on my list.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Offset reports. days, waterline, dynamic draft. Okay. Okay, right. Right. Mike Annis has a good point that NSD has other models of pause systems. So technically what I said before was not true. We don't all have the same pause model, which means these numbers are going to be different. And I'm sort of thinking, I'm sure somewhere in like message 20 there's some record that tells you what kind of pause system you have. I'd have to think about that because I had to think about that. I can also just tell you all the, I don't know. Let me think about it. It might very well just be in there and I just missed it. Port. Specs. Okay. All right. Any other questions? Okay, great. So just to wrap up, so Charlene 3 is out. The Keras 11 stuff that we're doing and the validation, there should be some more information coming out real soon. Yeah, and that's about it. Great. Well, thanks, everybody. Appreciate you coming in. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks.
He just laughed.